And this morning we have Joshua Milligan joining us. Joshua Milligan is a Tableau Zen Master and a Tableau Social Ambassador. His passion is training, mentoring, and helping people gain insights and make decisions based on their data through data visualizations using Tableau, of course. He's a principal consultant at Technion Data Solutions, where he served clients in numerous industries since 2004. And Joshua is a technical reviewer on several of the Tableau titles that are out there, books for learning Tableau. And then, of course, he's also an author of Learning Tableau. There's the book right there. So with that, Joshua is going to be talking to us this morning about the new Union feature that was released in 9.3. And without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Joshua. So I'm going to pass you presenter role and unmute you, Joshua.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And let me just get my screen up and we'll get going. Well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first annual State of the Union's address. My fellow Tableau community members, it is my great privilege to report on the State of the Unions, and the State of the Unions is strong. All right, so this morning we're going to talk about unions, and of course we will talk about what a union is. We'll talk about how they work and how you can make them work for you. We'll talk about when you can use them. We'll talk about a few situations where you may not be able to use them, and we may look at a few examples of what you can do if you're unable to use a union. And then most importantly, or at least one of the most important things, we're going to take a look at how you can test the union. So I don't have any concerns technically from Tableau doing a union, but I need to check my data to make sure that the union worked in the way that I expected it to. So we'll talk about some tests that you can run and some simple ways that you can just look and make sure that the union is working, and some potholes to avoid as well. We'll talk about what to do if you do come across some issues with the union. How can you fix those problems? And finally, sure, we'll do some Q&A. If you have questions along the way, I think the Q&A window you can type in there, and I'll try to reserve a little bit of time at the end where we can do that. All right, so let's start with what a union is. So a union is different from other kinds of joins where if I join multiple files together, or multiple data sources, multiple tables, I'll end up with more columns. Here the idea is that I'm going to be joining together multiple data sources. In this case, it may be files or it may be sheets in an Excel spreadsheet. We'll talk about all the different ways that we can get a source for a union. But the idea is that I have data that's the same structure, or basically the same structure, and I want to just concatenate that together. I want to get all of those rows into one data source with just a single set of fields, and then all the rows from that data source, so that I can use it in Tableau to create visualizations, to create dashboards, and do everything that I love to do in Tableau. So that's the basic idea of a union. All right, so where do we see unions? Let's say that there's this guy in your office, we'll call him Peter, and his job is to create a file, and he creates a file every month. So you get one in October, November, December, and so on. You get a single file, and you can put all of these in a single directory, and that used to be a problem because there used to be no way to get all of that data together except for going in and manually copying and pasting and building out one text document that then I could use as a data source. But we'll see how we can make this really easy with unions. So unions work with flat files, so they could be text, They could be some sort of a comma-separated values or tab delimited, any kind of a flat text file. The key is that we're going to put them all into one directory. So they have to all be in the same directory, but in that case, I can union them together. Some other options for unions, if Peter were to create an Excel spreadsheet, and you can see there at the bottom of this sheet, we actually have multiple tabs, multiple sheets within this Excel workbook, assuming that, again, that it's all basically the same structure of data, the same fields. We can actually union all of those tabs together, and we'll take a look at how that might work. Additionally, within Excel, there are times when you may have multiple tables in a single sheet or a single tab. So here you can see we have state and sales goal, but it's broken up into multiple different tables. We have 4 tables there. You can actually union all of those together. And we can even get a little bit more complex than that. And before the day's over, we'll take a look at an example of how that might work. So those are the basic data sources that you can use with unions: flat files and Excel. So these types of data sources where we didn't really have good options for unions before. Used to be way back in earlier versions of Tableau, we could write some custom SQL for Excel, but that was kind of messy, and there wasn't a good option for text files at all. Other data sources like your relational databases and those sorts of things, you can write custom SQL to do unions. So far in Tableau 9.3, it's Excel and text files. So with that, let's take a look at some real-world examples. And by real world, what I mean is, of course, Star Wars. Well, we'll get to some boring data later on, but we'll start with this. So I've got some really simple data here just to show how we can use a union in Tableau. So we've got 3 tabs here, and you'll see that each tab has just several rows of data. Name, occupation, income, and preference are our columns. And so if I click through, you'll see those are the same in each tab. And so I've got this saved as a single Excel file. So now I'll open up Tableau. And what we'll do to create our union is we'll just connect to Excel like we normally would. And then I'll have to locate that file. And of course, it wouldn't be a presentation if something like that didn't happen. All right. So here we go. We've connected to our Excel file, and you'll see that Tableau has brought in each one of those as a sheet. So originals, prequels, sequels, and you'll notice a new icon down here called New Union. So we'll talk about several different ways that you can create your union. One possibility is just to drag a single sheet out there first, and then just to drag the other ones out there. Now, if I drag it out here and just drop it somewhere else, you'll see that's a join. So I'll undo that. What I really want to do is I wanted to get it close enough to the originals where this little space pops up that says drag table to union. So if I drop it there, you'll see what it's doing is it is just adding those rows from that sheet to my data source. And I can drag as many sheets out there as I want, and it keeps adding rows and keeps adding rows. And when I'm done, I can go to my sheet, and I can use this as I would normally any other data source. And you'll notice it's a live connection right now. So I can use this as a live connection. I can use it as an extract, but I've got all of my data here, and I can take a look at it visually just like I want to in Tableau. So Tableau makes it very easy now. That was a single Excel file, but multiple tabs, but they were all the same basic structure. Now I can use them all together as a single data source. You'll also notice that what Tableau has done is it's added a couple of fields here called sheet and table name. Those were not in my Excel file, but you'll notice what those are. Those tell me which tab of the Excel file I was using. And if I look at table name, you'll notice here they're all the same because each sheet just had one table. But we'll look at an example or two where we may have had more than one table. And we'll also see how this works with text files in a little bit. But the great thing is that I can use these fields as I would any other fields. So you'll notice I can use them as a dimension in the view, and I can also create calculated fields with them. So if I just wanted to create a calculated field here, just to give it a name of trilogy, so that I know what I'm dealing with, you'll notice Tableau had no problem. But if I were to open this up in Excel and let you have a look at it, here's what it looks like in Excel. So you'll notice name, occupation, income, preference, and then age here in the Originals tab. When I go to the Prequels tab, age is gone. Occupation has been renamed job. Income, preference, name, those are all the same. Sequels, the same basic thing. So let's take a look and see what Tableau does when we run into some of these things where maybe columns change names, or maybe we have additional columns or fewer columns. So let's just build our union out as we would have before. And this time I'll grab new union, pull that out there just to show this capability. So when I drop a new union in there, it's going to bring up this dialog, which allows me to give the union a name. And then I drag my files in there as I would like to normally. I can multi-select these holding Shift or Control or whatever the button is on Mac. Just select all of them, drag them all in at once, and say OK. And you'll notice I get the union just as I would have before, but you'll also notice that that I've got some potential issues here. So as we saw in the Excel file, in one tab it was called occupation, in the other two tabs it was called job. You'll notice I still have sheet and table name that can help me out a little bit. You'll also notice that age was present in the first tab, but not the second. Now the great news is that Tableau is giving you a lot of flexibility here, because it's not forcing you to have the exact same file structure or data structure with the data sources that you're going to union together. But you're going to have to do a little bit of due diligence to check things out and make sure things are working the way that you want, and potentially to fix some issues if you find them. So here, if I look at this, I can actually fix all of these issues right here in the data pane. Age, I may decide that column is not very useful since it doesn't exist throughout the data or throughout all the data, so I can hide that. And then when I look at occupation and job, what I might decide to do is merge those together. So Tableau has a new feature called merge. I just select both of those columns. So if I hold down on Control while I click there at the top, it selects both. And on the drop down, I can find this new feature called Merge Mismatched Fields. And then we'll talk a little bit more about technically what this is doing, but just practically watch what it does. It just merges those two fields together. So it took occupation from the first one, it took job from the second one, it gave me a new field called occupation and job, and it gave me the data that existed in either one. And we'll talk a little bit more about technically what that's doing and how to make sure that it works the way that you want, but it worked just great here. We don't have an occupation and a job, but I might give it occupation/job. If I tried to call this occupation or job, it would complain because those fields already existed, even though I can't see them now. It's hidden them, but they're still there, so I'll just call it occupation/job. And now I can go and visualize this just as I would before. So you'll notice there were a few issues that we had to clean up, but still fairly easy to come in here and start building out visualizations, start to see what's going on in the data. And so a lot of flexibility with unions. But I do want to point out one potential issue that you may run into. So if I look here at income, I'll notice I've got 58,501. That's the sum of all the income in the file. But let's go back and see if that's really true. So I'm going to remove this union. Notice on the drop down I can get to customize. There's my options again, and I can also remove it. Let's see what would happen if I created this starting with the prequels. An error. You know what we might do is just close the data source and connect again, just to make sure that nothing's cached. So if I start with the prequels, and then the originals, and then the sequels, all right, I noticed some of the same issues. And I also noticed that it's not going to work with the example that I want. So let's try this again. So I start with the prequels, and what I'll do is I'll highlight originals and sequels and drag them both out there at the same time. All right, so now it's going to do it the way that I want it. I go to sheet 2, and let's look at income. Notice it's 58,500, not 58,501. All right, so what's going on? If I go back and look at my data source, look at income right now. Income is all whole numbers. So you'll notice Luke 2,000, Leah 30,000, BB8 2,000. So all whole numbers, no decimals at all. But it all depends a little bit on the way that I build the union. So if I remove that, if I start with the originals, if I close my data source and start with the originals, look at the data in the originals. There are actually decimal points in this data. And now, what should happen as I drag this out, since I started with the originals that had decimals and the others which don't, Tableau says, well, you started with decimals, so we're going to keep everything in decimals. And so if I look here, I'll see how the data type is number decimal and not number whole. But when I started with the prequels, since the prequels are whole numbers, it thought, well, we'll treat everything as a whole number. And, that was $1.47 difference over 3 rows, but imagine that you're working with a data source with hundreds or thousands or millions of rows. That difference can add up to be quite a bit. So that's one thing to double check on a union, or really anytime that you're using Excel or text data. Make sure that your data types are what you expect them to be, and especially with unions where they can potentially change from file to file or tab to tab. Just double check, because that can make a huge difference. And also that goes to show you should always start with the originals and then go to the prequels if you have to, and then the sequels after that. All right, we'll leave Star Wars behind and go to a little bit more real-world examples. Let's open Tableau again. And let's imagine that the guy in our office, Peter, that he had created all of these files that we had seen before. So a file for each month, starting in January 2016, and all of these are comma-separated values. We'll take a look to see if they're the same columns, but we're going to assume that they are. We've told Peter that he needs to make the same columns. We've told him to include a cover sheet. We sent him a memo on that. And so here are all the files. Again, I can start the union in different ways, but one way that I might do it is just drag the first file into Tableau. And when it opens up, you'll notice that that's the file that it's got in my connection to start with, but it's also listing out every other comma-separated values file in that directory. So they have to be in the same directory, but if they're there in that directory, they are available to union or to join or whatever I want to do with them. In this case, I want to union them. And I could go through one by one and drag them up there and append, or what I can do is just hold down on Shift, select them all, and drag and drop them into this new union. And you'll notice as I did that, we got a lot of additional columns. So if I undo, watch the bottom, there it was with the first file, redo, there it is with the union, lots of different columns. Once your data starts to get a little bit more complex than the simple example, now it may be a little bit harder to see in this preview what you need to do. There may be a few things that you'll see, but what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you a way that you can actually test your union to make sure that you've got what you want. And again, notice that at the end, it has given us the table name field. No sheet name here because this is not Excel with sheets, but it does give me a table name, which in this case is the name of the file. And that can be quite useful too, as I need to know where the data came from. And there may be other uses too that we'll take a look at. So if I go to sheet 1, what I like to do, now that I've got my data source, and you'll notice it just kept the name of the file, first file, I could rename that. But now that I've got this data source and it's got all the files in there, first thing I'll do is I'll check just to make sure. I'll drag that table name field over. And sure enough, I have the 12 months of the year that I expect. And the next thing that I like to do is just to check the number of records that came in the files. And so just a simple bar chart to let me take a look and see, do I have the data that I expect? And this is where you'll know the data, or at least hopefully you'll know it. You'll know what you expect. You may expect 1,000 records consistently every month. If you see a file that is 500 records, you'll question that. If you see a file that's 2,000 records, you'll question that. You may have a variable number of records, and you may not know exactly what to expect. In that case, you might want to do maybe a little bit of statistical analysis on this and potentially go to your analytics and just put a distribution band on there. So we'll do that per cell of the table and maybe just look at some standard deviations. So maybe I'll go out 2 standard deviations in either direction and just take a look at that. What happened to my standard deviations? I don't know. Well, assuming that it works, you can see if everything fell within. Oh, there we go. Much better. Per pane, not per cell. All right, so now I can see that things fell within at least 2 standard deviations. So I'm pretty happy with that. This is a big picture view. This allows me to see, did I get the amount of data that I expected? But there's another question that I need to ask, and that is, at a field level or at a column level, do I have what I expect? And so I'm going to go to a new sheet here, and I'm going to start to explore this. And this is one way that I came up with to do a test of a union. You may come up with other ways that you like, but I found that this way works pretty well to start to see what's going on. So I'm going to start again with just my table names so that I can see each individual file. And then the key here is I just want to check each field to see, does it exist in the file or not? And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to start to build out a view here that uses measure names and measure values. The easiest way for me to get there is just to double-click one measure, double-click another measure, and now I've got some things going on here that I like. But this isn't quite what I want to see. I don't care about the sum of discount or the sum of postal code. What I really care about is the measure of count. So I'm going to change the measure to count on each of those. And this is getting me started. You'll notice I'm seeing counts of 0 in some, but this is still a little bit difficult to go through and find all the zeros. So to make it a little bit more visual and easier to see, I'm just going to take measure values, drag it to size. And even that's pretty easy to see, but all I really care about is is there a 0 or is there 1 or more? So edit my sizes. And to do that, all I've got to do is set an end range of 1. So if it's 0, it'll be the really small size. If it's 1 or higher, it will be the really large size. And now I can visually check each field. The measures are really easy. So I can just select a bunch of those, drag and drop all at once. I can select them all again here in the measure values. And I don't want sums, I want counts. So pretty easy to change all of those at one time. The dimensions are a little bit harder, but Tableau still makes it relatively easy. So I like to just right-click and drag. So holding down on the right mouse button and dragging it in there, it allows me to select how I want to aggregate, and I can do a count. I have to do them one at a time, but it's not terrible to do it this way. So I'll take a look at each of these. Count, order ID, order number, count, region, subcategory we'll do. We'll skip table name because that's our special field that Tableau generated, but zip will bring that one in there as a count as well. And at this point, what I have is I have a view of all of my files and all of my fields, and I can start to see what's going on. To simplify it, I'm going to take a look at some of these where the field exists in all the files, and I'm going to think, okay, that's okay, so I'm going to get rid of it. Discount exists everywhere, so we'll drag that out. Profit and quantity exists in every file, so I'm going to drag those out. We'll go on sale, subtotal tax, zip code, all have potential issues. Category, we'll drag that one out because it's fine. Customer name, order ID, order number, region, and subcategory are fine, so we'll pull those out. And what we're left with now are the fields that don't exist in every file. And what I'll do is I'll start to organize these, so I start to see things that I think, okay, postal code and zip code, those kind of all belong together, so I'll just rearrange. And everything else seems to sort of have fallen into place as well at this point. And now what I can do is just go through and figure out what the issues are. So the first thing that I see that jumps out at me is that order ID and order number. It looks like through February we called it order ID, but then it switched names to order number. So here's a case where I can merge those together, just like we did before. But I don't have to go back to my data pane. I can actually do it right here. So I select order ID, order number, and use the drop down. And right here under transform is my merge option, merge mismatched fields. I click that and it breaks my view, but that's because it tried to get rid of order ID and order number and create this new field called order ID and order number. So all I have to do is take out the order ID, order number, and I can check if I want to bring that order ID and order number back down into my measures as a count. And now you'll see that one is showing up everywhere. And I could call that, give that field a name if I wanted to, that makes more sense. So maybe that's my order key. And I'm going to do this for every field that I see an issue with. So zip code, postal code, and zip. Looks like all three of those, and it kind of just alternates back and forth. But the good thing is that I see that only one of them is in use at a time. So that gives me confidence that I can use the same sort of idea here and take postal code, zip code, and zip, and select each one of those and merge them here as well. So I'll merge them. Once again, breaks the view because those fields are now gone, but I can pull those out. And my new field called zip code, and postal code, I'll make that a dimension because it really is. I'll rename it to maybe order zip or something like that. Again, can't use the names of fields that used to be there, but order zip was never used, so I'll drag that into measure values as a count. And now I have a single field that I can use consistently with my union. So order zip is good now. Customer name is a problem. There's probably nothing I can do with that because it just started to come into use in July. So I'll just have to decide if it's useful or not. It doesn't exist throughout all the data. It's not there in the entire data set. So I'll just have to decide if I want to use it or not. But now I'm down to these last three fields: sales, subtotal, and tax. And the question is what are these and what can I do with them? So at this point, I may need to do a little bit more investigation. So we'll change the view. I'll take measure values and put that on label instead. And now I'm not going to worry so much about the count, although it does let me see a little bit more detail. But what I really want to do is understand the sum. So I'll switch it to sum, and you'll notice sum gives me a value when that field exists. It does not give me a value. It gives me a null when it does not exist. And what I'm looking at here, and I can confirm this with Peter to see if this is true, but what I think is we had sales all the way up to October, and then we started to capture sales broken down into subtotal plus tax. So what I would think is that this 78,000 total of subtotal and tax should be my sales. So what I need to do is I need to take all of these and merge them together. Now you might be tempted to use the merge function again, and I'll go ahead and do that. But before I do, I'm just going to grab a screenshot of what we have here so that we can come back and compare at a later point. So I'm going to take sales, subtotal, tax, and we'll see what merge does. Transform, merge mismatched fields. And of course it breaks the view, but that's not a problem. I'll just drag that and drop that onto measure values. All right, so the good news is now I have a field here that is giving me a value for every file in the union. But when I come and compare to the screenshot that I just took, let's see if it actually really worked. Well, 42,000 for a first one, that looks good. 21,000 and so on and so on and so on. And I get to here, 85,000 in September, 85,000 in September, that looks good. And then I look at October, I have 72,000 over here in Tableau, but I look at what subtotal and tax should be, and I realize the 72,000, that was just my subtotal and not my tax. And again, the 114,000 in November, that's just my subtotal. So what's going on here with the merge function? Well, if you're familiar at all with the coalesce function in SQL, that's very similar to what merge is doing. What merge is doing is it is going field by field and finding the first value that it comes across and taking that. So it looks at sales and it says, does sales have a value? Yes, we'll take it. Yes, we'll take it. When it comes down here to October, it says, no, sales is null, so we go to the next value, subtotal. Oh, subtotal exists, so we'll take it. But it never gets to tax because it found a value with subtotal. And the same thing in November, the same thing in December. So this is a case where merge doesn't do exactly what we want it to do. What we want instead is we want to add subtotal and tax together. And in fact, if we were to add all of them together, so if we were just to add the whole row here and the whole row here, then we would get what we wanted for our value. So instead of merge, I'm going to undo a couple of times to get back to where we were before we merged. So instead of merge, what I'm going to do is just create a calculated field that adds these together. So I might call this sales total, and I'll take my sales plus my subtotal plus my tax, and I'll say apply. And if I do that and I bring sales total out here and take a look at it, notice what's happened here. Sales total is coming up blank for everything here. And the reason is because when I add something to something to something, if any one of those things is null, the whole thing goes null. So when I added sales to subtotal here and subtotal was null, well, my sales total is null. And since there's a null everywhere, everything comes up null. So to fix that, I'll just use Tableau's nice little function called zeroNull, Zn, and I'll put that around each one of these. So what Zn does is it returns an expression if not null, otherwise returns 0, which is just a fancy way of saying if sales has a value, will you use it? If it's null, we'll make it 0. So now instead of adding nulls, we'll add zeros, which is just fine. And now when I hit apply, notice I've got a sales total that actually works. There's the 78,000 that I expected, and not the 72, which was just the first value found. So that's some of the ways that I might test the data, that I might fix some of the issues that I find with unions. Those are some of the things that I might be able to do. Let's take a look at one more example that just shows how complex unions really can get. So I'm going to close this one out. I'm going to let's get rid of that, and let's open up one more file here. So we'll take a look at the file in Excel first, just to see what all is going on. All right, so we've talked about how we can union different tabs together. Here's an Excel file that has 5 different tabs, and the first one has actually 4 different subtables. So if I looked at Central and East and West, those all just give me the states and then some measures associated with those states, like profit and sales and number of orders, number of customers, those sorts of things. But when I look at my sales goals tab, that one is giving me each one of those regions, but it's also giving me an additional measure of sales goal. So prior to 9.3, if I'd gotten a data source like this, I either would have sent it back to the guy and said, give me a different one, or I would have been stuck manually building this out. But in Tableau 9.3, things get a little bit easier, even with a data source as complex as that. So let's connect to, again, this one will be Excel. So we'll open up Excel here, and I've got a couple of options of how to start this out. I could union together all of the region tabs, but let's start with that sales goal tab. That's the one that looks potentially the most complex to me. If I just drag that one out there, you'll notice that the Tableau looked at that and came up with columns all the way across. It didn't see all those as subtables, but that's because my data interpreter isn't on. If I turn that one on, notice that now Tableau has actually come up with a lot better looking data source here, but it's not exactly what I want. It has also given me each subtable within that sheet. And so what I really want to do is I want to take each one of these subtables, that's my state and sales goal, and state and sales goal, and I can union those together. So I'm going to remove that one. It still leaves my subtables out there, and I can create a union here just like I would normally with the subtables. So even subtables within a single sheet can all be unioned together. And you'll notice here's a case where it gives me the sheet name as sales goal, and then it gives me the table name as the range in Excel that it recognized as the subtable. So that may or may not be useful, but definitely good to know that it's there. Then I've got my Central, East, South, and West tables, and how do I get those out there? If I were to pull that in and union it, that's not at all what I want, because state was the same. Well, it actually works fine because it just brings in sales goal and keeps my other columns. So that works fine. But what I may really want to do is instead of getting multiple rows per state, if I just wanted to keep a single row per state, which I have right now. If I look over here, 49 states. So some states missing, but I have 49 rows. What I can do instead is bring out a new union, and we'll bring in Central, East, South, and West into that union. and we'll call this our state data and say OK. Notice now what I can do is join a union with a union. So kind of an interesting thing. We're getting rather sophisticated here, and I can double check. It's joining on state. That should be just fine. So state in the first union with state in the sales data union, and I still have 49 rows, which is exactly what I want, 1 row per state, and it's got all of the data that I wanted. It's got my sales goal, it's got my sales, my profit, my orders, and now I can go and take a look at these sheets. You'll notice that each one of these now has the table name and sheet name. So sales goal has a sheet and table names, but state data also has sheet and table names. And those are the same because the tabs were the tables as well. But I also have everything else that I could ever want. I have all of my states, 49 of them. I have my sales. I have my sales goal. And so maybe if I wanted to create just a bullet chart, I can do that and see who's meeting the goal, who's not. And I always end up clicking it the wrong way, where the goal becomes the bar and sales becomes the reference line. So I right-click the axis and say swap reference line fields, and it swaps those two out. And now I've got a nice way of looking at all of that data contained in that complex Excel spreadsheet. I can see it all together. So unions are an incredible feature in Tableau. They do some rather amazing things, and the complexity that you can deal with is rather amazing. There are times when you'll want to union and you'll find out that you can't, especially if you're working with data sources other than Excel. If you're working with a relational database, then you can use things like custom SQL. If you're using some sort of a data source that you would want to be able to union together, but you find that you can't, and you're not able to write the custom SQL, there is the capability of potentially doing what we used to have to do, which is something like this. So if I go in here and I look at my files, here what I've done is I've got that original spreadsheet that we looked at that was rather simple, but I've got it all, each one in a separate file. So I could use the new feature of union, but let's pretend like this was a data source where I was able to connect to the data. I was able to connect to one part of it, and the other subsets are separate. But I can extract the data, so I'm gonna make it an extract, and we'll come in here to sheet 2. We'll save this, and if you find that you can't union your given data source, what you can do is with an extract, and you can append data from a file. So the nice thing is that this can be all different kinds of files. You can append text files. You can even append other data extracts. So it's a little bit more manual, but it is a possibility if you're working with a previous version of Tableau, or if you're working with data sources that don't support unions. Then you can do this. So I'm going to append from the file. So I select my next file and append there. It brings in those 3 rows as part of this extract, and you'll notice now I've got 6 rows. I can do it again and again and again as many times as I want. I can keep appending from files and come up with new rows of data. And that's similar to the union, but not quite as nice because it's a little bit more manual. And I also don't have those special fields of table name or sheet name. So although I get all the rows of data, I can't ever really figure out where they came from once I have it in my extract. But that is definitely a possibility to think about if you're not able to union. But unions are incredible. They're a way to tackle really complex data and to really simplify things when you have a lot of text files or Excel tabs or subtables within Excel. So I would like to So once again, thank you for attending this first annual State of the Union. And once again, say the State of the Unions is strong. Thank you so much.